Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra Thiessen. You can call me Allie Thiessen, and I'm here with Fiveable and doing a lesson today on how to source documents. So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments. Tell me where you're from and let me know if you are a teacher or a student joining with us today. While you're answering that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am a teacher. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. I taught social studies for 8 years, and I taught AP World History for 6 years. But currently, I am in Ulm, Germany, where my husband and I just moved about 3 weeks ago. And so while it is afternoon for you guys, it is 11 p.m. over here, and when we get to the end of this live review, we're going to do a little countdown to midnight because this is probably the latest I've been up in a very long time. All right, so we got a couple teachers in here. Any students up in here? There is a New Ulm in Minnesota, and every time I try to search for something, New Ulm always pops up. Any students in here? Let us know. And then teachers, you guys who are in here, are you guys back in school yet, or are you still on summer break? Oh, I got a student. Welcome from Illinois. Are you guys back in school yet? Still on summer break? If you're on summer break, what are you doing in here? I'm just kidding. You're ahead of the curve if you're on summer break. No school till Labor Day. Yeah, we don't go back. An international school here, we don't go back until the first week of September. All right, so let's get into it. And what our topic is today, we're going to be talking about document sourcing, how we analyze documents and how we're going to use them in AP history classes. Now, if you don't know, this lesson is perfectly well for not just AP World History, but also works great for AP US History and AP European History. If you didn't know, all three of those histories are now aligned. They use the same rubric. While the content is going to be different between those three histories, these methods are going to work great for all of them. And so I'm very happy that you guys are here joining me. And if you're just starting school or you haven't started school yet, some of this information will also be great to go back and review during the year, or go back and review when we get to that AP test time. And so let's jump in. Let me tell you what we're going to be learning about today. So our lesson today, we're going to first go over some terms. Because if you just started school or you just started this course, some of these terms may not be as familiar for you. Or if you're reviewing them and they're terms that you feel like you should know, but you still kind of are iffy on, we'll go over those. We're going to look at how we work with documents as historians. And then our main focus, of course, for this lesson is how to source using a technique known as HIPP, H-I-P-P. We'll do some practice and look at some examples. Now, this is something that's a little bit hard to do in like a kind of brief amount of time. This is something that takes a lot of practice. And it takes a lot of practice because documents are also different. Whatever you're going to get is going to look different for the prompt that you're looking at. It could be for the type of question you're using. Some documents are really, really long, and some are images. And so it's going to look different. And the more you practice, the better you're going to be at this. So if this you feel like is your first time getting introduced to sourcing and it's way over your head, it's okay. It's going to come with a lot of good practice. So let's start with some terms that you should know for the AP history classes. And so the first term that you should know is a primary source document. And so in a primary source document, what we're looking at here is a firsthand account of an event. It could be a firsthand object. It could be a speech that has been transcribed, and you're going to get a lot of different experience with primary source documents. There's also things like secondary source documents and tertiary source documents, but the main one that you're going to encounter as a new AP historian is a primary source document. The next term is DBQ. Now raise your hand if you know what DBQ stands for. A DBQ is a document-based question. Document-based question is one of the types of essays that you're going to see on the AP history exams. Now, with a document-based question, what you're going to get is a series of documents that you're going to have to analyze and interpret in multiple ways. And so this is where our lesson is going to mostly focus. But you can also look at sourcing for multiple choice questions and for short answer questions as well. So what do we do with documents on a DBQ? Well, we're going to have to analyze it. And that's a word that you're going to hear a lot. Your teachers are going to say, hey, you need to analyze this. You need to analyze it deeper. Well, what does that mean? All analyzing is, or all analysis is just closely examining evidence of the past. And so you have to take a deep dive look into the information that you're presented, and you have to make sense of it. And so it could be connecting information, things that you already know to something brand new. It could be really closely pulling apart information. And one way that we analyze for documents is through sourcing. So that's our focus for today. So what in the world is sourcing? Well, we're looking at the source of a document. Where did it come from? Who created it? At what time was it created? What type of person made this document? Who is this document for? All of those are various factors that surround a document that influence how we as historians, and you now as historians in an AP history class, how we interpret that. So those are the terms we're going to be looking at and seeing over and over again when we're working with documents. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes and go through those terms for you. And feel free to ask questions in the comments as well, and I'll get to those. So when we're working with documents, they're going to look different on different times. You're going to see documents on an AP exam in multiple choice questions, in short answer questions, and of course in a DBQ. And so one that you may see something like this. It's a chart. We could see a chart, we could see a graph, we could see a map. These things are taking evidence from the past, and then they're going to be connecting them somehow. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to read the graph, read the chart, see what's happening on there, and then you're going to have to analyze or connect it. You could also see an image. And in an image like this, it's like, wow, I have something, I have no idea what it is, never seen it before in my life. And so you're going to have to be able to read into this a little bit more using some of your sourcing, what you know about the time of the document. And what is very common is something that looks like this. And if you've taken an AP history test, you have seen lots of documents that look just like that one on the screen there. You're going to get a little blurb about what the source is, and then you're going to get some type of written document. And students hate these. Any guesses why? They're long. A lot of times these types of documents are really long. And so students don't like it because it takes time. You have to read it, you have to comprehend it, and then you have to be a historian and make connections and make sense of what the document is. And so it takes a lot of time and energy just to read something like that. But it's all for a good cause, and we're going to learn how to work better with things just like that. Now, when it comes to working with documents, what we need to see here is the rubric. When we're doing an AP history exam, and especially one with a written component, teachers and graders are going around the world and they're coming to the AP reading and they're judging and scoring your essays based on a rubric. And so it's impossible to really know what they're looking at if you don't understand what the rubric is asking. So where do we get the sourcing from? Well, it comes from the rubric. And on the DBQ rubric, you get 2 points for analysis and reasoning. And one of those points, the first of those points, is by sourcing the documents. So here's what it says in the actual rubric. For at least 3 documents, explains how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument. Now, this rubric is the exact same one from last year. So if you took an AP History class last year, this is the same rubric you're working with. And so what we need to do to parse out this information, we actually get also from the College Board, they give us a little blurb of how we interpret this. Here's what it says. To earn this point, 1 point, to earn this 1 point, the student must explain how or why. Explain, louder for the people in the back, explain how or why, rather than simply identifying the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience is relevant to an argument about the prompt for each of the 3 documents sourced. Now, this rubric is the same DBQ rubric. All the rubrics are aligned across the histories. Now, 1 point, you're going to have to analyze 3 different documents, and you're going to have to look at them through their source. Their source being the point of view, the purpose, historical situation, and or the audience. You only have to do 1 of those for 3 documents, and it doesn't have to be the same one. You don't have to do point of view 3 times on 3 different documents. Maybe document 2, you analyze the author's point of view. Maybe document 4, you analyze the author's main purpose or intended purpose. And maybe for document 6, you're looking at the historical situation. And so it is not an easy task because you really have to think like a historian, and you can't just blurb it out there. You have to use it in a meaningful way. You have to explain how or why rather than simply identifying, and connect it back to an argument based on the prompt. How do we do this? You're not going in there blind. If you didn't check out my poll, go ahead and check out my poll, because teachers around the world use different techniques and different tactics to teach how to address this 1 point. And the one that I use is HIPP, H-I-P-N-P. Why do I use HIPP? Well, I get it straight from the rubric. So here's what it is. H-I-P-N-P. Now, breaking this down, it's exactly the 4 points that are offered from the rubric. So H stands for historical situation. I, intended audience. P, purpose. And the second P is point of view. And so when we're looking at these 4 things, it comes straight from the rubric because it said we need to explain how or why the historical situation, the audience, the purpose, and point of view impact the argument. And so I just pull those 4 out and I use HIPP. Other teachers use HAP or happy. Some go a different way and use things like soap or soapstone. But I'm going to just focus on this one for now. Any method that you use, as long as you're using it well, is a good method. If you're using any method, you already have a jump start. If you have some type of tool in your tool belt that you can pull out and use for this. So again, the one we're just going to worry about today is HIPP, HIPP. So what we're going to be doing before we jump into some of the practice, I'm just going to go over some tips for you guys when it comes to sourcing a document. When you get the sources, what you're going to get is pages, and they're just going to have the sources in different, or the documents in different boxes. And on those documents, you're going to get a little blurb line, and it'll say source, and it will tell you who was the author. It'll tell you when it was created. And then sometimes there's a little bit of good background information about the source, or maybe the time period or the name of whatever it is. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to write all over the documents. Now on the AP test, you're only given a pen at this point, or a dark blue or black ink pen. So you're going to annotate all of your documents. You're going to write all over, and you're not writing, I don't know anything. You're going to actually write an attempt to source, because you have this tool in your tool belt. And so when you're looking at your documents, you're going to start annotating. You're going to underline things. You're going to circle important things. And what I think is most important is writing in the margins. Now, you only have a certain amount of time when it comes to reading all the documents and writing a DBQ essay. So you want to use your time wisely. You don't want to waste time going back and having to reread documents and reinterpret their sources. So what you're going to do is, when you're looking at those sources, you're writing in the margins, and you are, circling the date, and you're writing in the margin things you know about going on in that time period, or a little bit about that source if you know who it is or what kind of person they are. And you're writing all over your document, you're annotating. Now, sourcing should be a part of your close reading of the documents. You only have a short amount of time when you're reading the documents, but they don't snatch your documents away. You can continue to read, but make sure that you give yourself enough time to actually write the full essay. But doing the sourcing and writing in the margins and being cognizant of, or being aware of, what's going on with the documents and their sourcing is going to save you a lot of time on the back end. And that's why I say write it in the margins, because you're going to want to have those little visual cues so that when you go back to write your essay, it's right there. It's in the margin, so you don't have to think over again, what did I think about this document, or what was it talking about? You're underlining, you're circling, and you're writing in the margins. Again, don't ignore the source line. You're looking at what the source is telling you. Some students, it's like reading the instructions and you just kind of want to get to it, but read the source because it's telling you who wrote it or when it was produced. So you want to look closely at that source line. Don't ignore it. Now, how I'm going to explain when we use this HIPP tactic is I want you to think about it in two parts. And when it comes to actually writing the essay, think about those two parts as like two sentences. So when you are doing your two sentences, the first is just kind of a brief explanation of the source. What is the H, historical situation, I, intended audience, P, purpose, or P, point of view. And you're just kind of briefly explaining, identifying that source. But remember, our rubric said you cannot just simply identify, you have to use it. So that's where the second sentence comes in. You're going to connect it to an argument about the prompt. And so making that connection is going to be the difference between doing sourcing and earning a point for doing the sourcing. Now, over time, you're going to get better at this, and you'll probably be able to condense it down into one really solid sentence. But when you're first learning, do two sentences. Your hand isn't going to break. Well, it may break. I'm sorry if you have a broken hand right now. Now let's jump into some of the practice. Now, you may not be really on it with this because we're just learning, and that's absolutely fine. Now, in this lesson, our lesson's only going to be about 35 more minutes, but you can always go back if you have that premium subscription and go back and read through these documents again at a later time and really work through these steps to try to write out really solid sentences. Now, what we're going to do for practice is we're going to look at just H, just I, just P, and just P. So that's just historical situation, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. And we're going to look at 4 different documents. Now, one document can probably give you historical situation and purpose and point of view and intended audience, but we have to work with at least 3 different documents. And so we're going to be looking at 4 different documents so we can look at each of these. Note, you only have to do for 3 documents, 1 part of H, I, P, or P. So historical situation, purpose, point of view, intended audience. You just have to do one of those for 3 different documents, and you can change it up and do 3 different parts, or you could do 2 intended audience and 1 purpose. So the prompt that we're going to be using is one about the Cold War. Now let me know in comments if you know anything about the Cold War. Fingers crossed. I try to pick some document prompt that at the beginning of the year or summer, if some of us are in summer, we know something about. So here's what the prompt says. Using the documents in your knowledge of world history, we are very knowledgeable about world history, evaluate the extent to which the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union affected other nations and or regions of the world in the period 1945 to 1989. So we have a prompt, and we have to live in the bubble of the prompt. So the prompt is about the Cold War and its effect on other nations and regions during that time period. So we have to make sure that when we go back and we are going into that second sentence and we're making sense of the source, we have to connect it back to the prompt, and we have to make an argument about how it affected other nations and or regions. Yes, some of us know Cold War. We are going to be on it. So let's start with our first one, the H. Tell me in comments, what does H stand for? Sound like Austin Powers? You guys don't know that reference? Who does number 2 work for? Tell me in comments, do you remember what H stands for in HIPP? Ah, yeah. Pat on the back. Woo-hoo. Historical situation. Also, side note, you may also hear it being used as historical context. Absolutely fine, but my mind gets confused between the contextualization point and what we're doing with sourcing. So I just call it historical situation. So yes, we got it right because we were awesome. So let's get into historical situation, a little bit more about it. When we're looking at a document, it's going to tell us a year, and that's helpful if we know something about history and we know what's going on at some periods of time. And so while yes, it is possible to write a DBQ essay without learning any history, you're probably not going to get the source point. So when we're looking at historical situation, we're looking at the time period. And what do we know about the time period in which this document was produced? What does the document demonstrate about the historical situation of that time? Is it telling us a historical process? Is it demonstrating something that's historically relevant, like imperialism? And then we can also look at if there is any historical significance of the source or the document. We can connect it to time periods before and after as well, just like you've learned with contextualization. And so when we're looking at the historical situation, we're placing the document in a specific time in history. And this is perfect for primary source documents. Because remember, primary source documents are written or produced at the time period. So we need to carefully look at, well, what's going on at that time period and what else in the world is going on that could have an impact. So the first document we're going to get, we're looking at historical situation. So in your mind, just kind of go away, IP, and we're just looking at the H, historical situation. Here is our first document, and it's a good one, because there's very little reading involved. And so here we have the source line. Again, you're going to see these in all of the documents. So here we're looking at the source line, Klaus Lennartz. Anybody know him? I don't, and I'm in Germany currently. But we do know Berlin. And Berlin is in what country? The one I'm currently sitting in. I'm not sitting in Germany, but I'm in Germany, and Berlin is in Germany. And this was August 16th, 1961. So here's what I want you guys to do in comments. In comments, we're going to take a stab at historical situation. Not Berlin, Wisconsin, sorry. I want you to take a stab at what you think the historical situation is of this document. What is going on at this time period based on the time period that we see in the source? August 16, 1961. You don't need to know anything about that date in particular. Well, you should. But that year, around those years, write in comments, take a stab, any guesses are fine, about what you think the historical situation is of this document. What's going on at this time? Let's see in comments. Not the Holocaust at this time. You're in the right country, though. Any guesses of what is going on in this document? Now, when we're looking at images, first thing we have to do is actually look at what's happening in the document. So here we have an image. Anybody have a guess about what's happening in this image? Cruz got it right. It's the construction of the Berlin Wall. And so the Berlin Wall, constructed August of 1961, divided Berlin by East and West Berlin. So here we know it's the construction of the Berlin Wall. We know that it divided East and West Berlin. And if you know something a little bit about the Cold War or the end of World War II, you'll know that in East, that Berlin, the capital, was divided East under control of the Soviet Union and West, which was democratic and free at that point. So what we have is this division. So knowing that this is the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, we're going to attempt to situate it or put it into what's going on in this time period. Well, if you know something about World War II, or you know something about the Cold War that's going on in this time period, maybe you know of some other events that are taking place that are points of conflict and crisis in the Cold War. 1961 is also a major event that almost brought the US and the Soviet Union into the brink of a nuclear war. Anybody know what that event was in 1961? We'll see if we really know the Cold War. Nailed it! Cuban Missile Crisis. So that's something that also plays into this historical context. So we know that this is a heightened time in the Cold War when there's a lot of distrust between East and West. We're not just seeing that invisible Iron Curtain, but now we're seeing a true barrier between Eastern Bloc and Western Bloc. So how could this look in an essay? As depicted in the image, construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 attempted to stop the flow of residents from Soviet-controlled East Berlin into the West. Tensions between the United States and Soviet Union were at a high, especially in Europe, where the Iron Curtain had emphasized the division between the Communist bloc and the West. So if you see here, what I've done is I've used two sentences, like I suggested before. Now, you may not use this floofy language that I did. I don't even think this one is really that great, but I am demonstrating how this could work. First sentence, I'm just saying what the historical situation is, and then I need to connect it. And that's why I use two sentences. Now, historical situation, I'm going to go back to that document again. You're placing it into time and place. I personally think that historical situation works really, really well for images. Let's say that you get the box that I showed you guys in one of the earlier slides. Well, what do you do with a box? Well, you can look at the historical situation without really knowing anything else about the image. And so knowing the historical situation and explaining the time and place in which that was created is one great way to use images and do sourcing. Okay, let's try the next one. I. So after H, we have I. Tell me in comments if you remembered. What does I stand for in HIPP? Boom, got it, intended audience. Some people teach it as HAPP, H-A-P-P. I've always done intended audience because here's where students get confused. They think they're the audience. And I hate to tell you guys, we're not the audience. Me personally am not the audience. What we're looking at is the intended audience of the document. To whom was it originally for? I'm sorry to say, they're not writing to you taking an AP test in May of 2020. That's weird to say. And it's not directed towards you. We're looking at, especially for primary source documents, if this is a document that predates your life, which they all probably will, who was it originally for? Is there a particular group or person that the document is for? How does that audience affect the reliability of the document? Because if I was going to talk to my principal, I'm going to talk to my principal differently than I'm going to talk to my best friend. And so knowing the intended audience is going to play into how the document was written, maybe some of the language that's being used in the document. And then we can also look at if the document is trying to influence the audience in some way. Is there any inherent bias in the document itself based on who the document was intended for? So let's try a long document because we're going to get a lot of these. And so here we go. This is President Jimmy Carter, President of the United States. I don't know why I didn't say that, but anyways, this is an address to the nation on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, January 4th, 1980. So if we were to get a document like this, it's big, it's intimidating, it's long, it's got words. So what we need to do is annotate. So if I'm annotating this, I'm going to be underlining things about the intended audience because that's what we're working with right now. I could also look at historical situation, purpose, or point of view, but for our intents and purposes right now, we're looking at intended audience. So we have a long document, but don't worry, I'm going to read it for you like a bedtime story. Recently, there has been another very serious development which threatens the maintenance of the peace in Southwest Asia. Massive Soviet military forces have invaded the small, non-aligned, sovereign nation of Afghanistan, which had hitherto not been an occupied satellite of the Soviet Union. 50,000 heavily armed Soviet troops have crossed the border and are now dispersed throughout Afghanistan, attempting to conquer the fiercely independent Muslim people of that country. Sorry, my cat just jumped up here. The Soviets claim falsely that they were invited, oops, I can't see that anymore, to Afghanistan to help protect that country from some unnamed outside threat. But the president, who had been the leader of Afghanistan before the Soviet invasion, was assassinated, along with several members of his family after the Soviets gained control of the capital city of Kabul. Only several days later was the new puppet leader even brought into Afghanistan by the Soviets. This invasion is an extremely serious threat to peace because of the threat of further Soviet expansion into neighboring countries in Southwest Asia, and also because such an aggressive military policy is unsettling to other people throughout the world. This is a callous violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. It is a deliberate effort of a powerful atheistic government to subjugate an independent Islamic people. We must recognize the strategic importance of Afghanistan to stability and peace. A Soviet-occupied Afghanistan threatens both Iran and Pakistan and is a stepping stone to possible control over much of the world's oil supplies. That was beautiful, wasn't it? Now, here's what happens. You read a long document and you forget, what am I doing with this document? What was the point of it? And that's why we annotate, we underline, we circle things, we write in the margins as we read, because if you just straight read it like I did, way over our heads, we're going to forget it. So let's look at the intended audience. Look back at the source line. Who is the intended audience of this document? Write it in comments, share. Who do you think the intended audience is? Any guesses? All right. The audience, it says addressed to the nation. The nation that the president is a part of is the United States. It's a public address to citizens of the United States. Now, here's where I see some of you guys getting a little confused. It says addressed to the nation on the Soviet invasion. It's addressed to the nation, and the topic is on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So it's a public address. Now, that doesn't mean it's just available to US citizens. If it's a public address from an American president, you bet in 1980, this is going worldwide. And so we have to see this also as the intended audience beyond just American citizens. It also can be other countries. So let's take a look at how we can look at the intended audience, what this could look like. While US President Carter was addressing citizens of the United States, he's also sending a message to allies of the United States to stand with them in the Cold War. By calling it a, quote, callous violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, he is attempting to convince American allies and other members of the United Nations to stand with the United States into taking action against Soviet aggression in Afghanistan, thus widening the Cold War conflict through the Middle East. Again, I am very long-winded. I just can't get to the point. So 2 sentences. We say what the intended audience was, and I say addressing citizens of the United States, but also a message to allies of the US. And then we're connecting it back to our argument, how it affects other nations in the Cold War. So that was kind of a long one. So intended audience, again, it's not us. The intended audience is kind of hard to do when you're looking at like a map or a graph. So unless it's like very, very apparent, I would really only do intended audience when it's something like this, when it is specifically for a person or a group of people, or it shows some type of intent behind it with the audience. You just want to be a little bit careful with this one because you don't want to attribute an audience to something that's not the actual audience. All right, let's go on to our 2 Ps. Now we did H, historical situation, I, intended audience. Tell me, what are the 2 Ps? Tell me in comments if you remember what either of the 2 Ps are. We'll go in a slight order, but pick one. What does a P stand for? First one we are going to be looking for is purpose. Now, remember how I said with intended audience that we are probably not the intended audience sitting and taking a test in May of 2020. Purpose, I hate to tell you, is not for you to read it on a DBQ in May of 2020 taking an AP test. So we also here have to kind of look at the intended purpose of the document. Why was the document originally created? Why was it created at this particular time? What is the goal of the document? And does its purpose or goal impact its reliability? So we have to look at what is the intended purpose of this? What is it meaning to do? What is it trying to accomplish with this document in this way? Hopefully my cat doesn't jump into this next one. So here is a statement by the signatories of the Warsaw Pact, December 2nd, 1970. If you know what the Warsaw Pact is, high five. If you don't, you'll learn. So what we're looking at here is a document. We have the date again, and then in the front part, they're going to kind of skip through that first paragraph there because it just tells you the countries that are signing this, involved in this statement of the Warsaw Pact, and we'll look at those 2 sentences. Like a bedtime story, I'll read for you. The United States of America has recently committed new acts of aggression against the Democratic Republic of Vietnam by launching massive attacks against its territory. These arrogant acts of American imperialism have generated deep outrage all over the world. Once again, the USA is showing its contempt for all generally accepted norms in relations between sovereign states, even going so far as to break its own promises. The contempt for the continuation of the criminal war in South Vietnam, the extension of the armed invasion in Laos, the contempt for Cambodia's neutrality and the aggression against it, together with the new air raids on the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, are all links in the same chain and elements of a policy designed to suppress the national liberation movement, to impose a brutal imperialist diktat, and to use the armed force to make these nations comply with the demands of imperialism. The American imperialist attempts to break the will of the Vietnamese people and to intimidate and subjugate them have failed. U.S. policy has met with one of its greatest defeats. The more the USA extends its intervention, the more the brave people of Vietnam, supported by their socialist sister countries and all of the forces of liberty, will stiffen their resistance. So again, long document. We should be annotating if this was in a real DBQ situation, circling things that stand out to us about the purpose. And when we're looking at purpose, remember, we're looking at what do they mean to accomplish with this. So the signatories of the Warsaw Pact, German Democratic Republic, that's East Germany, People's Republic of Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Socialist Republic of Romania, Czech Socialist Republic, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, that's the USSR, are putting out this document. It's a statement by them. So they're making a statement, just like we saw with the intended audience of the last document. It was intended for not just US citizens. Here we're looking at purpose. What are they trying to achieve by making this document public? So in the comments, take a stab at that. What do you think these signatories, the people who signed the Warsaw Pact, are trying to achieve by making this public statement? What are they trying to do? Write it in comments. That's a great guess. Trying to get Vietnam or other countries to join their side to fight America? Great guess. Because remember, with a purpose, we have some type of goal here. And even not just Vietnam, but they're calling out other countries in Southeast Asia. They're addressing how the US is an imperialist country, trying to impose a brutal dictatorship and using armed force. So they're using their language, absolutely, to try to get other countries to join their side against the US. So here's how we could put it into 2 sentences. For purpose. In a published statement, Warsaw Pact countries controlled by the Soviet Union attempted to discredit US actions in Southeast Asia. By highlighting the failed American intervention in Vietnam, these communist countries identifying, I just liked including this at the end, as socialist sister countries, are trying to spread Soviet influence over Southeast Asia by allying themselves closer to those countries resisting American intervention. So absolutely, we're looking at them trying to influence Southeast Asia, to try to influence public perception about the US, to try to paint them in a negative light that makes the United States look really bad. And using that kind of language just highlights that. So again, with purpose, we're looking at what are they trying to achieve. And so this one, I generally think is pretty easy to do. But again, it is also easy to kind of mix up, because when we're looking at the purpose, again, the purpose, one of my pet peeves is when they say the purpose is to inform historians. No, there is an ulterior purpose, though. What are they trying to achieve? They're trying to achieve by discrediting the United States, by making allies for their cause. And so by using that kind of language and then connecting it back to our prompt there with the second sentence about how it influenced other countries and regions, we're making those connections. We're stating the purpose and connecting it back to the prompt. So we have done HIP. We're hip, but we're not hip yet. We have one more P. So we did historical situation, intended audience, purpose, and the last one, point of view. Absolutely. So when we're looking at the point of view, we're looking at the point of view of the creator or author of the document. And I'm sorry to say, not your point of view. And I think this is where students get confused on point of view, because it's the point of view of the source. And we have to remember what we're doing sourcing. So we're looking at the source, we're analyzing the source. So we need to look at the source's point of view. And a lot of times we're going to see in these documents an author. So we saw the last one was the source was Warsaw Pact countries. That's okay. We can do point of view about Warsaw Pact countries because they're controlled by the Soviet Union. They're communist countries. That's going to influence how they interpret things. If you're the president of the United States of America, well, your point of view based on your position of power of the country of the United States is going to impact how your point of view impacts the argument. So looking at point of view, we're going to look at what can we infer or guess about the source based on the information provided. Unless you've read a biography of President Jimmy Carter, chances are you probably just know he's President Jimmy Carter, President of the United States. Maybe you don't know that at all, it's fine. And so if you don't know anything about the person's background, their religion, or race, don't assume, because that's where point of view can go wrong as well. And you just want to look at things that are going to have an impact on the reliability of the document. Just because it is a document, let's say you have a document written by a female, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a feminist point of view. And so you have to be careful there to not overgeneralize or oversimplify based on any aspect of the author or creator of that document. We need to look at the source, but we need to look at how the source affects the document and how we understand the document. Does that make sense? I'm hoping it is. Again, don't be afraid to ask questions at the in the comments, and I can get to those at the end as well. So let's look at our last document. So this last document is our source at the top. Here we have a little bit more information. It says June 19, 1968, Pravda, official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party. And then it's telling us a little bit about the source or about the document. I love when they do this. It's like, thanks for the summary. Woo. It says condemns the new political course and the liberalization measures taken in Czechoslovakia during the Prague Spring. If you know a little bit about the Prague Spring, or you know about what's going on in Czechoslovakia at that time, great. Do historical situation. But if you don't, this one we can look at point of view. Again, we're looking at the point of view of a newspaper. So it doesn't have a race or anything or a gendered newspaper. That'd be weird. So here we have an official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party. Give you a little hint. You can take a stab at the point of view just by that line alone. Official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party. Take a stab, guess in comments, what do you think you could do with the point of view just by that statement? Official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party. How is that going to influence this document? Take a guess in comments. Political persuasion, absolutely. They're communist. What else do we know about the Communist Party of the Soviet Union? How do they approach or control information? Any guesses? Kind of a hard question if you haven't gotten to this point in history yet. If we're looking at an official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party, it's gone up the line somewhere. It's been officially approved. And so it's really a political stance more than it is a media stance. So now let's just read this for the sake of it. Here's what this article says. The situation is such that the threat of the foundations of socialism in Czechoslovakia poses a threat to the vital interests of all socialist nations. It is the historical responsibility of all communists from socialist nations to ensure that the revolutionary victories achieved thus far should not be forfeited. Each of the fraternally united parties is answerable not only before its own working class and its people, but before the international working class and the global communist movement, and cannot shirk any of the responsibilities that implies. Therefore, we must be united and show solidarity in defending socialism, our security, and the international position of the entire socialist community. Out of international duty, delegates at the Warsaw meeting, on behalf of the central committees of their communist and labor parties, appeal to the Central Committee of the Czechoslovak Communist Party to defend the power of the working classes of all workers and to protect socialist achievements in Czechoslovakia. This required a decisive and courageous strike against the right-wing anti-socialists and the mobilization of all means of defense at the socialist states' disposal. So again, we looked at the source before we read this. We know that it is coming from the official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party. They have a bias as a newspaper. We know that they are the media arm of the Communist Party. Well, the Soviet Union has a stake in this. They don't want to see countries like Czechoslovakia breaking away. And so they're influenced and they have a bias that's impacting the information in this newspaper. And so that's what we need to look at for point of view. We need to look at how the source can have a point of view, even if it's not a person, but how it influences and impacts what we're seeing in the document. So here's how we could see this in an essay in 2 sentences. Because this article is from Pravda, the official newspaper of the Soviet Union, they are distributing propaganda throughout the Soviet Union to influence opinions about the Prague Spring Uprising by using language that is defending and protecting socialism in Czechoslovakia. They act as a mouthpiece of the Soviet government to try to stop the rise of liberalization efforts in the region to maintain their control over the Eastern Bloc. So again, we're saying what the point of view is. We're saying that it is propaganda of the Soviet Union and what they're trying to do with it. They're trying to influence opinions. How they're doing that, they're using this language and they're trying to influence people. Again, that's our prompt, how it affected people in other nations and regions. And so that's just a sample there of what you could do with point of view. And again, I chose this one because it's a little bit more difficult because it's not an individual person, it's a newspaper. And so you can do point of view for objects like that, which is kind of fun. All right, we've made it through the end of practice. If that was over your head, it's okay. We can always go back, and this is something that takes practice. It absolutely takes a lot of practice. And so don't be overwhelmed. If you're watching this in August, we have the whole school year left before the AP test. If you're rewatching this back, you got this. Just practice it a few times and you'll be fine. Let's do a little bit of summary before we break for your afternoon and my evening. And so just in wrap up and summary, we did some practice with sourcing. So we looked at the source of the documents. We looked at the people, we looked at the document's point of view, their perspectives, and we took a close look at them because we analyzed how the source impacts our understanding of the documents. We learned one way to do this, but there are multiple ways, and none of them are wrong as long as we're using them right. The one I taught today is HIPP. It stands for historical context or historical situation, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. So remember, when we go to do these on a DBQ document-based question essay, for 1 point of analysis and reasoning on the DBQ rubric, we need to closely analyze how that document's historical situation, intended audience, purpose, or point of view impacts an argument based on the prompt. We need to do this 3 times for 1 point. But last hint before we go, if our goal is to get it 3 times, you're going to try it more than 3 times. You need some backups in there. It's always good to do this at least for 5 or 6 of the documents. How I always kind of ensure this is if you're writing 3 body paragraphs, do it twice in each paragraph. And that's one way that you can ensure yourself that you're getting enough information about it. Another big takeaway before we leave is remember, it's not just identifying. We need to connect it back to an argument. And this is a skill. It's going to take a lot of practice. And practice is just going to make progress. You're just going to get better at this the more time that you have working with documents. So big takeaways. You get a document, don't be scared, read it, look at the source, underline, write in the margins, and closely look at how that source, their historical situation, the time period, the audience that it was meant for, the intended purpose or goal, or the document source's point of view impacts an argument. And that's our big takeaway for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Be sure to follow us at ThinkFiveable. Make sure that you are tuning into other videos. If you want to see any of my videos, again, my name is Allie Thiessen. You can follow me on Twitter at at Mrs. Thiessen, and I hope to see you guys at another time. If you didn't start your school year yet, enjoy the rest of your summer. If you are already back, I hope you're having a great first few weeks back. And if you're rewatching this video before the test, good luck. You got this. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.